A very warm welcome to our guests this afternoon. We have Balca Ergener here on the screen, live from Zurich. She's an artist born 1980 in Istanbul, and she studied in Istanbul and in Zurich at the Hochschule für Künste, and where she lives now and where she is now. And I'm really happy to have you here, if only on the screen, but we have you joining this talk, which is really nice. We have Judith Raum. She's an artist, born 1977 in Wernicke. She studied in Frankfurt at the Stiedel School and at the university in Frankfurt, and today lives in Berlin. And we have Michaela Melián, born 1956 in Munich. She studied at the Art Academy in Munich, and today is a professor at the Hochschule für Bildende Künste in Hamburg. And she's a visual artist and musician. And all the three artists produced or created a new work for the exhibition that we just opened yesterday. The Futureless Memory is a collaboration, like a curatorial collaboration between artist Dilek Winchester and myself. The concept was conceived by Dilek Winchester, who is an artist born and living in Istanbul. She unfortunately can't be with us because of the travel restrictions. And she decided for the title of the exhibition. Maybe I say like just a little word about the exhibition, or the title of the exhibition, which is a term coined by Vamik Volkan, a psychologist who was dealing a lot with mourning and loss, and the ability of people to overcome loss and mourning, and the futureless memory is a memory that has no future. So it's a memory where you have like accepted that it is something that is lost, but you can still remember, but without the hope or the actual thinking of a future for that, whatever you remember or miss. Like it could be a person who died or lives far away, or a country that you had to leave, and this is where the title comes from. The exhibition deals with artistic work in exile, and I think it's there's a lot of contemporary artists in this show, but there's lots of historic references. But for me, the show deals a lot with current issues that we are confronted with these days, and almost ever, it seems, that there's conflicts and people are forced to leave their countries, forced to migrate. But we are lately only talking about refugees, but we are not talking about exile. And I think thinking about the terms and what's the connotation and meaning of these words is, because refugees is always this process and of somebody who is like on a way to something from somewhere, but it's never about the situation of being somewhere, wherever that is. So I hope that this exhibition with all those historic references will also help us to talk about like very actual and current issues. Michaela Melián did the sound piece in the exhibition. I don't know if all of you have seen the exhibition. It's a light and sound installation. Movement für Susanne Lachmann. We will learn more about that later on. And Judith did the piece with the curtains, and there's also like slides in the installation. It has the title In den Tag hinein. And she will talk about the context of that installation. And Balca's work is the 2 monitors and 1 photograph in the back of the space. And we will learn about her work now. And if there's questions, please, you're welcome to ask questions. And there's more events in the course of the exhibition. We have a leaflet there, so you're very welcome to have a look in there, and then maybe hopefully come back for one of the other events. So, Balca, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I'm very sorry I can't be there today. And thank you very much for speaking in English for me. Yes, I'm from Istanbul, but I've been living in Zurich for 3 years now. And I was invited to the exhibition Futureless Memory to do a work about Gustave Courbet and his exile in Switzerland, because I also live here. And this was a very interesting research process. I'd like to thank Dilek and Katya very much for inviting me, and also Saha Foundation for supporting the work. I will try to tell you about this research now. Courbet lived in Switzerland at the end of his life for 4 years, between 1873 and 1877. He lived in a town called La Tour de Paix. It's on the Lake Geneva Riviera, close to the eastern end of Lake Geneva. So when you stand where he lived and face the lake, to your left is the end of the lake and a range of mountains. And across from you is a range of gigantic mountains, as Courbet called them. And to your left is Switzerland, and to your right, where the mountains end, is France. Courbet is actually from a town called Ornans in France, close to the Swiss border. It's on the French part of the Jura Mountains. I will share my screen to show some images. This is what the border close to his hometown looks like today from Switzerland. This is the Swiss side. After he finished his studies, he moved to Paris, but he kept going back and forth, and he was known as a countryman. And he traveled a lot to other cities and countries to do exhibitions and to do his works. He stayed with patrons and friends. So this is all before his exile. So before he came to Switzerland, he had a very productive artistic life. And he was controversially famous because he challenged traditions in art in terms of subject matter and form and application. He depicted conflict-ridden lives of different classes in the country and also in cities. And he had an international fame for this. In Switzerland, he painted many landscapes. In a letter to a friend written not long after he started living here, he wrote, "We've done many landscapes. What else can one do in Switzerland?" And he painted the lake and the mountains, which were becoming tourist attractions already then. And this is the last painting he did. It is known that it's the last painting he did. It's a grand panorama of the Alps. It's quite big. It's 2 meters by 1.5 meters. And it was intended as a comeback in Paris in the World Fair in 1878. But he did not finish it. As you can see on the bottom right corner, it's not finished because he lost hope about his future. And he painted many versions of Chateau Chillon, which is a romantic landmark remembered with Lord Byron's poem Prisoner of Chillon, which could also be associated with Courbet's own condition in Switzerland. And this site was very close to where Courbet lived. And this is what it looks like today. There is a Café Byron, and you can see the reflection of the castle in the window. A famous painting by Courbet, now in Musée Yeniş in Vevey, the neighboring town, is Sunset on Lake Geneva. And I think it's very similar to a painting he did in his hometown much earlier in 1839. And his house in La Tour de Paix was on the lake, and he liked swimming in the lake very much. And earlier in his life, he had done many seascapes. He traveled to the seaside and made many paintings in different places. In a book called Courbet Reconsidered, authors Sarah Fawn and Linda Nochlin write about his seascapes. They say water was an element to which Courbet was particularly responsive, and as an avid swimmer, one that he could not only paint but immerse himself in totally. Here, they mean in this painting, he faces his subject head-on, identifying with the force of nature to a remarkable degree. Indeed, almost making the roar of the sea stand as a metaphor for personal freedom. And his relationship with the lake was similar. As I said, he liked to swim in it. There's a police report where it's written he was swimming naked with a friend one night and reacted aggressively when the police warned them. And there are some paintings he did, like this one, which shows stormy weather on the lake. And some art historians associate these with his melancholic state in exile. But the region does have strong winds that storm the lake up, and I think they can be associated with the darkness in many of his paintings, which is very striking. And his wave series, I've just shown some examples of, and his stormy character and life in general. Also, it was reported by his doctor that before he died, he said, "If I could lay in the waters in the lake, I would be saved. I'm like a fish in the water." He had made 2 paintings of a dead trout, probably back in his hometown Ornans, after a 6-month imprisonment in Paris for his participation in the Paris Commune. And one of them, actually now in Kunsthaus, Zurich, this one is inscribed with the phrase "made in captivity," although it was made after. Some art historians write that this might have enhanced the commercial value of the painting. But again, Linda Nochlin, for instance, says that it also signals how much he identified with this mortal struggle and feeling of entrapment. There are some traces of Courbet in the area where he lived. There's a sculpted portrait of a woman with a seagull on her head, according to one interpretation, telling her stories of her distant homeland, on 2 sides of a building looking at the lake. This is one, and this is the other one. The piece is known as the Seagull of Lake Geneva poetry, but Courbet also called it the dream of the future in a letter to a friend. Close to his house, next to the municipality building, is the statue Liberté. Courbet donated the statue to the town for their hospitality, but initially he had named it Helvetia, and instead of a star on her chest, there was a cross, a federal cross of Switzerland. But conservatives complain that the sensual qualities of this woman and the Phrygian cap on her head, worn by French revolutionaries, associated her with the radical republic that the commune imagines. So they asked him to change the name and also the symbol on her chest. And Courbet's grave, where he was buried until his remains could be moved to his hometown in 1919, is also very close to this statue. Courbet came to Switzerland because of an ongoing trial about his participation in the Paris Commune as a delegate of the government and as a president of the Federation of Artists. He was held responsible for tearing down the Vendôme column. and his studio and works were confiscated, and there was a big public campaign against him, attacking him. His trial ended during his exile, and despite his efforts to convince the newly elected government, he was sentenced to pay a huge sum of 323,091 francs for the rebuilding of the column. And he died one day before the first installment of the fine was due. There is controversial evidence about his participation in the final decision to take down the column, which was a military and imperial monument topped with the statue of Napoleon I, which was only 8 years old at the time, because between the time the column was built in 1810 and when the final version of the statue was inaugurated by Napoleon III in 1863, the statue kept changing by a succession of regimes. And actually, until 1792, on the same spot was a statue of Louis XIV, and it was torn down by revolutionaries. So this was a very contested site already. As I said, Courbet probably wasn't present in the last meeting where the decision was taken to take down the column. But we know that he advocated for its dismantlement in 1870. He said it was devoid of artistic value and that it perpetuated ideas of war and conquest. And we also know that he was a firm believer in the republic and democracy. He fought for the freedom of arts and artists. He declined an imperial medal offered to him with great publicity in 1870. He donated a painting to buy a cannon for the National Guard in Paris and had the cannon named the Courbet. And we also know he worked enthusiastically for the Commune. In a letter to his parents during the Commune, he wrote, "Dear family, here I am, thanks to the people of Paris, up to my neck in politics. President of the Federation of Artists, member of the Commune, delegate to the office of the mayor, delegate to the Ministry of Public Education, four of the most important offices in Paris. I get up, I eat breakfast, and I sit and I preside 12 hours a day. My head is beginning to feel like a baked apple. But in spite of all this agitation in my head and in my understanding of social questions that I was not familiar with, I'm in seventh heaven. Paris is a true paradise. No police, no nonsense, no exaction of any kind, no arguments. Everything in Paris rolls like a clockwork. If only it could stay like this forever. In short, it is a beautiful dream. All the government bodies are organized federally and run themselves. And it is I who presented the model for it with artists of all kinds." The Federation of Artists was founded with the participation of hundreds of artists and decorative artists and architects, and they envisioned a solidarity between equal members who would work to free art from all governmental supervision and from all privileges. And their manifesto was read out loud by Eugene Potier, who would later write the lyrics for the song L'Internationale. And in here they proclaimed all artistic matters would be administered by artists, from the staffing of museums to the organizing and financing of salons, the allocation of public commissions, and the appointment of teachers of art. They were going to ask the public to give their opinion on matters concerning the public and art, and they were going to work to spread art around the country. Their manifesto finished with the words, "We will work cooperatively towards our regeneration, the birth of communal luxury, future splendors, and the universal republic." After Courbet died, the column was rebuilt anyway by the Republicans, and it stands there today. And in her article, The Politicization of Gustave Courbet, Linda Lachmann writes that his name was also rehabilitated by Republicans after his death. So when he became an object of history rather than an agent acting upon it. Because she says in 1877, the court ordered a sale of his works to go to the rebuilding of the column, and the price paid was only 10,000 francs. Whereas only 4 or 5 years after his death, the state and the city of Paris bought 5 of his works for 150,000 francs. So there was a great increase. And this was close to their value in 1860, before he was attacked with a public campaign. And Courbet was prevented from showing his works in France after the Commune, but 11 of his works were shown in the exhibition 100 Years of Great French Art in 1889. Lachmann says for this to happen, first Courbet's name was deassociated from his politics and not his republicanism or his interest in the popular subject, the peasant, but his participation in the Commune. And she says there was also a distinction made between his socio-political works and his other works, including landscapes, news, still lifes, etc. And a natural Courbet, an instinctive natural Courbet was invented, and the latter were deemed more valuable than the socio-political works. And finally, she says his name was inserted into the uninterrupted tradition of great French art. And he was, like his predecessors, transformed into a kind of commodity, a French tourist attraction, as it were, and a hero at once. Thank you.
What is your connection with Courbet? I was wondering, you grew up in Istanbul, studied there, came to Zurich to study there, and finding the place where Gustave Courbet, the French painter, died in Switzerland. Maybe, what's your relation?
Personally, I, of course, came here by choice. I didn't have to leave my hometown. But it is a little like an exile because life is difficult in my hometown, so I feel a little connection with that. And also this, what he said about Switzerland and landscapes and the lake, it's true that it's what amazes one here, and one feels maybe misses other things. But also, his story reminds me of many others who were made scapegoats and are still made scapegoats today. And they're deprived of their lives or their livelihood, their possibility to travel or live a good life. So I think it's very poignant in that respect. It's very current, yeah. And also how life goes on after these lives have ended or are stolen from these people, but life keeps going on. And I didn't know about this story before I started researching.
I wanted to give you a brief insight into Ottie Berger, who I worked about for my contribution in the show. And I wanted to explain to you why I'm working on her and why I think she is relevant for the show, and give you an understanding of why I find it very interesting as an artist to work with her, who was a textile designer, not a visual artist, and who is a member of the Bauhaus, who was a member of the Bauhaus, which I don't conceive to be the most important moment of her life. I think other moments are much more important, but I hope I can explain myself better. So just to have her once, to see her face once, this was Ottie Berger. She was taught at the Bauhaus, she studied at the Bauhaus, and she also taught herself at the Bauhaus. She was one of the most talented students, obviously, of Gunther Stölzel, who led the textile workshop at the Bauhaus. Ottie Berger was a teacher at the Bauhaus Textile Workshop from 31 to 32 under Lili Reich, who most of you will know. Lili Reich, the more or less famous designer. And the tragedy is that Ottie Berger really did a number of great fabrics, as I think, in the years after the Bauhaus. But because of her terrible death, she died in Auschwitz in 1944. Her career was never visible, never became visible. The career she had these immediate years after the Bauhaus, 1932 to 1937, when she had her own textile workshop, her own atelier in Berlin. So we nowadays have the situation, because she died, because she left no family behind, because there was no foundation to take care of her heritage, that things stranded in different archives around the world. I'm showing you a box with fabrics by her that is part of the Harvard Art Museums in Cambridge in the USA. There are other pieces by her in different other museums in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Switzerland, but it's very dispersed, and it's a big puzzling, like a big puzzle work to bring these pieces together and work through her work and make understand her design processes and her artistic processes. So just to give you an idea, her most important fabrics in my eyes are is the material that lies in America in the Bush Reisinger Museum in Harvard. Here you see a sample book with fabrics in natural colors and natural materials. I think she was really innovative for her time and very experimental, trying out very different materials from super natural looks we are used to nowadays. I mean, imagine this is almost 100 years old, what we are seeing here. Looks that are very natural cotton, natural jute, linen, to very highly artificial materials. Here, just for you to see the address of her studio in Berlin, Ottie Berger, in the bottom line, Atelier für Textilien, Studio for Textiles. Just to give you an idea, when I was at the museum, I visited this museum 3 times already, this collection in Harvard. For me, it was super exciting to see the originals and especially to feel them. It's very much also about the tactile sense, about how it affects your hands and your hand sense. She has awkward designs, very stiff, some of them shiny, some of them behaving like paper in your hands. And these are different designs also for wall spanning fabrics. In these times, it was still quite fashionable to bring fabrics on the wall. Yeah, so she was really a designer for materials in the house. Yeah, these fabrics have a strong relationship to architecture. This is why I thought they were really interesting, working with installation and thinking about space, and also thinking about it from a critical or political perspective. How was space conceived in modernism, and how did the perception and understanding of space change the moment the Nazis took over, and how did certain design, certain styles and certain beliefs actually survive and keep on existing throughout early National Socialism in the German Reich. For this question, she was especially interesting because she worked from 1933 all these years onwards. So these textiles date exactly back to these years when we already had National Socialism in Germany, and she was designing her fabrics in Berlin. Here you have natural tones again, in contrast to these very artificial materials that you see here. So she used both extremes, supernatural or super artificial, the latest technologies that were out there in chemistry, in the chemical industry and yarn industry. Wall spanning materials like this one, just to give you an idea, she had innovative materials also for curtains. Here you see this kind of net structures, like a fisher net basically, which she also had photographed by a photographer at the time to advertise them. Here an advertisement for the Italian magazine Domus, where she arranged, or the photographer arranged the fabrics in a way that you see the light coming through and how the material interacts with light. And I'm showing you these images because of these images of these curtain nets, of these net materials, because that is the material relationship to my installation that you have in the show here. Ottie Berger, when she was still at the Bauhaus and worked with Lili Reich, designed or developed these lace nets, so-called Gittertülle in German, window material for the windows that were just square nets, with little squares. So there is, in her later years, a direct connection to these materials, but it gets wilder and wilder. It changes into these kind of experimental dealing with net structures, as I showed you. So these lace nets, so-called Gittertülle, were part of a book, of a pattern book, ein Musterbuch, of curtain fabrics that the Bauhaus published in 1932-33, just before it closed, under Lili Reich. And these curtain fabrics, of which you see a few samples here, you see they had strong colors in red and in dark blue. Lili Reich favored dark blues. In the back, you see these lace nets showing, the last pages of this pattern book, of this Musterbuch, were the Gittertülle. They published this in 1932 and showed it at a fair, at the Grassi Fair, Grassi Messe, in 1933, just before the Bauhaus closed. So basically these curtains were the last material the Bauhaus published before they were closed by the Nazis, the last exhibition, so to say. And lace nets, Gittertülle, this window material, were one of the favorite materials that Lili Reich used in her interior designs. You see here an interior design by her from 1931 in Berlin, where she covers the whole window with this material. And I had looked into this material extensively because I thought, how weird. I mean, Lili Reich, obviously, many of you might know, collaborated is maybe too strong, but she went on with her design work for throughout National Socialism. And she would always, in her interior designs, work with the same material. There was no cut, And this blurring of the gaze, or the blurring of the view to the outside, and also from the outside to the inside, so to society, to political ongoings, I thought was really intriguing, as kind of making things milky and unclear. She worked without. You cannot see an interruption in her design output, basically, before 33 and after 33. I worked with this material in the installation because it was actually Ottie Berger who developed this material together with Lili Reich. So in the installation you have the Gittertülle, which is a fantastic material, I think, because it is nowadays lost in Germany. You cannot find any producer anymore who produces it, whereas in the 30s, when they worked with it, there were more than 80 companies who were still able to produce this material on large machines, as you see here. Machines that were an English invention from Nottingham. And together with a weaver, I did research, a month-long research, and we finally found one company in Scotland who still produces exactly that material on exactly the same machines from the 30s. So that's where this material comes from in the installation, from a little town in Scotland. And it comes from machines that are 11 meters broad. And if you're interested, I can show you a small video where you see this machine in action, which is quite interesting. So to come to an end, escape. Why do I think Ottie Berger, why did I propose to Katja to have Ottie Berger here in the show? Ottie Berger, when the Nazis forbid her to work in 1935, she had her studio in Berlin. She received a letter from the Reichskulturkammer. You have to stop working. You cannot call yourself a Kunsthandwerkerin anymore. Please resign from your job. Of course, that was the ultimate destruction. And she decided, she went on illegally, so to say, to work. She collaborated with two companies, one in Switzerland, one in Germany, but went to London, to England in 1937 to try and make a living there, which didn't work out. And I have 2 letters in the installation which you can read, and these letters are very telling because they give us an idea of all the hardships and all the difficulties anybody who tried to make a living in a country where you even don't speak the language fluently and are working hard on establishing new professional networks, and nothing works out. And she was a woman, and she was a weaver, which was thought to be an uninteresting thing, I guess, among all the architects' friends that she had. So there's a lot of impossibilities speaking out of these letters. And then there is one more letter in the installation, which is actually the last sign we have of her before she was deported to Auschwitz. She was killed in 1944, and this letter dates back to 1941. And this was the last letter anybody ever received of her. The Gropiuses, Walter and Ise Gropius, received it. The letter is written to Ise Gropius, called Pia. Pia was the nickname, Pius, Gropius. Pius was the nickname of Walter Gropius. Pia was the nickname of Ise Gropius. And Ottie Berger in that letter is surprisingly positive, as I would say. She was stuck by that time in Yugoslavia, in Croatia, because she had left London, her biggest mistake. She had left England to go back to her mother in Croatia, who was very sick, to help her. And that was when the war broke out in 1939, and she got stuck in Yugoslavia and never managed to exit the country anymore. And she never managed to go to exile. That's what she was trying hard. All the letters, testimony, her big effort to emigrate to the United States, which didn't work out. And in this last letter, she is quite optimistic, ultimately, because she restarted working on a carpet, on a rug, on a big piece, and she describes meticulously this artistic process, the colors she chose, and the difficulties she had in ordering these colors from the dyer. And it's very touching to read, knowing that we have no more traces of her left afterwards. Yeah. So, if there are questions, maybe just as a framework, this was not the first work I did about Ottie Berger. It came out of a longer process of research. I was commissioned a work on the weaving workshop of the Bauhaus in 2017, and produced this installation called the Bauhaus Space. It was part of a larger group exhibition that concentrated on artistic positions on the medium textile. And in that installation, my focus was already on functional fabrics, so things that had rather been neglected in the past because the wall hangings and the carpets by the Bauhaus weavers had always attracted most of the attention. So I had a couple of recreations of fabrics in this installation, for which I had done extensive research in archives. And while doing that, I had discovered Ottie Berger and her fate, and the unfair neglection of her work in art history and design history. So that's where my interest for Ottie Berger came out from. Yeah. it's a totally different system than in the loom, als ein ganz anderes System als im Webstuhl. They go in like a stair. They move in a stair pattern. Also die bewegen sich wie Stufen. And the thread always loops around. Also der Schussfaden dreht sich ein paar Mal um den Kettfaden. Dadurch wird es sehr elastisch. It becomes elastic in all directions. It's a fantastic technology. And just for you to understand what the contribution of the Bauhaus was at the time, it's really ganz kurz nur, Michaela, because I forgot that, and it's really two nice pictures. At the time, as you can see, people used this technology to produce fabrics with ornaments, with flowers and so on. And the contribution of the Bauhaus was to say, no, we don't want that. What can the machine do plainly? What is the plain mode of the machine? And that's what, you see here are in the right corner, the plain grid, and all the rest is ornamentation, and the Bauhaus chose for the plain grid, just to be complete.
I have one question about that, because you use this material which is so transparent, but you use it as a canvas for painting. I mean, you're painting on that material. How come that you use it as a canvas?
Yeah, because I just wanted to, in this process of my own interaction with Ottie Berger and her work, for me it was important to introduce at some point my own production, and not to celebrate it as the design element in interior space anymore or plainly, but to transform it into something else. And I think it becomes quite a suggestive element in space by that intervention.
So the starting point for my work movement here in the exhibition was the idea to bring at least one person from Hamburg in the center, and this person should be someone who's kind of wiped out biographically from the city and also from the artistic achievements she made. And I have chosen then Suzanne Lachmann, who was a very famous violin player, and not only talented, what is now written here in the book. She was really famous because she was born in a Jewish bourgeois, very cultural engaged family in Frankfurt, and then trained as a violin player in Frankfurt, Leipzig and Vienna. And there she started already as a second violin player in a very famous quartet. So I have to look up, because all these people who are involved in her biography ended up somehow in concentration camps or over the planet somewhere. And this was the Alberdingk Streichquartett. And this quartet, the first violin player was even family related to Gustav Mahler, and she was, so you might know, in which kind of cultural, high cultural and intense circle she was employed and also active, and as a young woman. And I can't call any quartet at that time, like chamber music quartet or ensemble, where a woman is the first violin player. So there's always the place in the second violin or the viola, or maybe the violoncello, but mostly it's the second violin. And she played in two other very famous quartets at that time. And with the other quartets, she came to Hamburg and stayed here for 10 years and did a lot of concerts in the Kleine Musikhalle, in the Leitzhalle. And today you only find kind of entrance flyers or cards, but not even the program she was playing or performing. You can't find that. So it's totally wiped out. And in 1935, you all know that there was the Nuremberg laws, and all Jewish artists and also other professions were forbidden to be active in German society. And so she only was able to play music within the Jewish Kulturbund, Jüdischer Kulturbund, and she was heavily involved and organized performances here in Hamburg. But then in 1935, she managed to leave the country, and then she ended up in the very small town north of Edinburgh in Scotland. So we are here in Scotland again, in a very small town, and to work here at a just started school there. And this school is also very interesting because it also binds the line back to Germany, because the school founder was Kurt Hahn, and you might know him as the founder of the Salem School later on, who's this very important and still very active reform pedagogical school in South Germany. And this guy, Kurt Hahn, also had to leave Germany because of his Jewish background and started his first reform pedagogical project there in Elgin. And there were not as much kids there who can pay a lot for this school, so it was more kind of a, I would say, a leftish project for all people to go there and for all kids. And she then started the musical education for no salary there. So till the end of the war, she was not paid for her job. She just was able to eat in the school and to have a room for her daughter and her in the school. And only in the late 50s, she managed to get a small rente, what is it, retired salary from the city of Hamburg, to survive there. And what I forgot, what I also liked very much about her biography, that she also started as a music teacher in a school in Hamburg, in Altona, which was also not such a rich neighborhood, to give music lessons to the kids. So if there's something left of her, because there's not a single recording, it might be that some very old persons in the city were trained by her in several instruments. But I couldn't find someone, so maybe that would be a research to have this kind of audio history, oral history, I mean. And because of that there is a biography who is just like wiped out, and also kind of like the music. It's also, if you hear music, it's just in the moment you can hear it, but then it's gone. You can remember it and you can record it. And even today we have all sorts of music recorded in the internet, but it's somehow, if you don't play, it's also somewhere in this huge garbage can internet buried. So the idea was to bring a music tune in the exhibition as resembling this kind of way of this woman and also her biography. So I tried to bring down her steps of her private life, the route, by train through Google Maps or the train routes, because at that time everybody used the train. And it started in Frankfurt, goes through Leipzig, and then to Vienna, up to Dresden, Prague, what else? Berlin, and then ended up in Hamburg. From Hamburg, then we have the migrant route, like many exiles took through Dover, Calais, Dover, London, up to Elgin. And this, it's kind of, if you take this points on the map, you get at least a kind of notation. And from this drawing, I made a melody, and the point of Hamburg was fixed as H. So in German we have the H, in English we would say the B, but H of Hamburg, so H, das H, H1 ist Hamburg und H2, B2 is Elgin. And from this distance I made the melody. And so it's kind of done out of the time she stayed at certain places, and also the the map, or you will find these places. And so for every city or place she was, there is one bulb lightning, and in the same moment, synchron, you can hear a violin playing this melody. And so it comes every 3 minutes, and it lasts for 1 minute, this one tune through the exhibition. And so it somehow fades out through the exit door in the very back of the exhibition. And if you are interested, you can read her biography here in the little booklet, but there's a little more information, and I think 2 or 3 photos in the library of persecuted musicians. You will find it, and there's a library of exile in Frankfurt, and also in University of Hamburg. You can find her biography, but nothing else is left. So this is kind of a comment as an idea that if we stress the word memory, we also have always to think about forgetting, because you only can memorize things if you are able to forget things. But so it has always this double bind, the memory with the forgetting, because it's a relief to forget things, but on the other hand, it's also a very shame that so many people are kind of wiped out of our history. And so this was the idea, to bring someone in who was very active here as a pedagogical and also cultural person. And there's not a street named after her or something. So that was my idea for the show. Thank you. And maybe someone has a question.
I find it interesting that at least she left a daughter behind, right? Did you find out anything about the whereabouts of this daughter, and if the material, the photographs came from the daughter, or?
I think there's one used photograph of her from the Hamburg time. That's maybe from the family, but the other photo is from the school in Elgin, where she also died. And I don't think the daughter is living in Germany. I think she lives in, somehow written in the library, she lives maybe in England. So the whole family is wiped out here in Germany. There's nothing left. And that's, if not people look after that in that very time, so the more time goes on, all this material like photographs and are vanishing. So if you have, like in every city, you have now these books of the Jewish population who was killed or had to leave the cities. I know that from the city of Munich, we have 2 big books on every Jewish person who lived in the city in that time. And most, I think 50% of the persons, you don't have a photo, not even a passport or something. And that's the problem with memory.
Thank you very much. Questions? I think it was a lot that we heard now about these 3 biographies and moments in time. Yeah, you were, the 3 of you were all dealing with like historic biographies or historic moments. I was wondering if you ever considered to being invited to the show to choose like contemporary, contemporary situation, or because we are confronted with so many people escaping from places that are conflictual, where's war. So why did you decide for the historic context? I mean, despite that you, in your practice in general, dealing with these issues a lot, so I mean, it's not a surprise, but still I was wondering if you could ever consider to connect it to.
So I could answer easily, because if there would be someone here who has this kind of biography, he or she should do it itself, and maybe I could help somehow. And there are a lot of students already also in the HFBK, who have kind of a migrant or dislocation personal history, and they're really hard working on bringing that in her or in their practice. And in my case, I just looked for a person who is kind of vanished out of the history, the memory of the city, and it should be a person who is well known in the city, even in the Musikhochschule and the University of Music, I would say, that they name some room after her or whatever. That would be an idea, because I would say it's, from today's view, it's an excellent biography for a woman at that time to end up in famous quartets. And so it's just an example. And yesterday I was really overwhelmed, because some young people came from the Lampedusa group in Hamburg to see the show because of the exile theme. And so they really catch my work just from the impression. So they didn't know about this woman and what my idea was, but this kind of melody who comes and goes, and the light who is just vanishing, they could really go with it, or without knowing a lot. So that's what I intend, that you can just make eine Verbindung to today, yeah. Because there are many people in the city who have kind of a history like that and can't continue like they wanted to live in their home countries.
Yeah, for me it's basically the same. I mean, first of all, as I said already, I am working on Ottie Berger at the moment, so also for this invitation to be part of the show, I didn't want to deviate. I wanted to keep on concentrating on her, and concentrating on the aspect of her failed exile was a welcome opportunity for me to embrace also that chapter of her life. But in the letters that you can see in my installation, I erased all the personal names. So you do not have the names of the people she's addressing. You just have a capital letter, and by that intervention, the sentences become very general. I have the impression when she talks, it's mostly psychological state that you can read in these letters, of being desperate, of feeling still some hope, of asking to activate networks. But in that sense, the sentences she writes become general in a way that I guess everybody who is in a similar situation might have the same impulses and the same feelings. So that was my interest to point that out, that things, of course, reoccur in history, and history is not old, never old, right? It's always something to work on every day. Balca, maybe, would you like to say something too?
Well, in my case, I was specifically invited by Judith to do a work about Courbet, because she had learned about the story and was intrigued with it, and she also thought I'd find myself in it, I guess, or I'd be interested in it. So this was the case. If I were thinking about doing a work about a contemporary artist or a contemporary person in exile, I don't know where to start, yes.